Let's all go to the
mall,
Let's all go to the
mall,
Let's all go to the
mall,
to get ourselves a
horror.
I asked Sally Ann, "What do you think about the mysterious Mr. Metcalf?" Sally Ann scoffed, "Like I care about a washed-up child star who played a one-note character. All he did was make boob jokes. So juvenile."
Grand Point was the first and only one, as far as they knew, mall to be built into a cave system. It had been a fun gimmick to bring in tourists to the tiny mountain town. It had seemed so promising. Most of their parents had worked on it one way or another before the money dried up and the shopping center became something to curse about over beers.
I'm curious about what your inspiration for closing time was.
Uh, well, it was a couple of things. I'm really big on found footage, so there's a bit of kind of found footage, abandoned places exploration, and also it takes directly from a movie called. So if you don't want to be spoiled for my story, do not watch that movie. Um, and also the game Silent Hill is it kind of weasels its way in there. Your story has like obviously very comic book vibes, very superhero, and I was wondering like how you came up with each character and their like alter ego name.
Generation Dead was it's a tribute to Gen 13 from Wildstorm Comics. So each character is kind of like a parody homage to those original five. I didn't want to like I didn't want to do a complete rip off of Gen 13, so I wanted to add a little bit to make sure the characters could stand on their own.
Your story gets into some gross stuff, so I was wondering where that idea came from and if you have any favorite gross movies or shows.
One of the inspirations for it was Betsy Haynes's Bone Chillers series. That was one of the pseudo Goosebumps titles that sprang up in the 90s when young adult horror was coming out in waves. And she was one of the lucky ones to actually get a TV show for her series. And I don't want to say which book specifically it was inspired by because I don't want to give away spoilers, but you've done a few body horror projects aside from this, right? I know that you've edited a couple of anthologies. Is that correct?
Yep. I would say that probably everything I do has in some way to do with body horror. It just is the way it is.
I can still be a bit squeamish. Like it took me until last year to feel comfortable enough to look at the Blob remake again. But I think the one thing I don't have the fortitude to revisit is Brian Yuzna's Society. That's like too much for me. Though I had
Uh
been,
I love that you say that because the Blob and Society are like my favorite.
what made you get into horror as a writer? If
I think it's just like the genre that I naturally like to watch and read. So it feels the most comfortable thing to write in. And I like that you can play around with a lot of different concepts in horror, whether they're like scary or gross or silly, and it still fits into horror because it's such like a broad thing. I also like that your mall is like brand new, just renovated, and mine is like decrepit and horrible. We really have both worlds there.
I figured that there were going to be some people who did stories about malls that were shut down, and since I was doing mine based on 90s comics, I figured malls were all over the place back then, so